Very good.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for Bhakti Circle tonight. Most of you are returning guests, so you know a little bit about Bhakti Circle. And those of you who are here for the first time, today's event is a little different. We have with us His Holiness Vijayananda Das Goswami, who will be speaking today. I'm going to read a little bit of.
I think I've heard it before.
Okay. So, H.D. Goswami, or for short, H.D.Goswami, is one of the most senior and respected spiritual leaders of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, also known as ISKCON. And he, in his earlier years, spent a lot of time studying Sanskrit and translating books, and he went to UCLA to study world religions and graduated with PhD from Harvard University with Sanskrit and Indian studies, and continued to, now I'm not reading, so. He's an early pioneer and renowned teacher of Bhakti Yoga in the Western world. At the forefront of contemporary religious dialogue, he's celebrated as for his unique ability to adapt the wisdom of ancient Indian philosophy into teachings that are comprehensible for Western audiences. Also, we have in the back, and we'll show you later, many of the books that he has published and translations of the Bhagavad Gita, literal translations with commentary, some novels that are based on ancient studies, a new edition of the Mahabharata. It's called the Great Bharat, and this is just the first volume of many to come. And so all the books are available in the back, and there's also a QR code that will take you to his website, his social media, his lectures, YouTube channel. All the books can be purchased on Amazon. There's one link that will take you to all of them. So after the lecture, you can check those. Some of the books are available here if you wanted to get them signed, but most of them you can take the QR code and order online. And just wanted to welcome you all. The restroom is here on the left. There's water in the back there. And just let's welcome H.D. Das Goswami.
Hey, Nalinita.
I failed to mention he also speaks.
Hare Krishna.
So, thank you all for coming. Nothing too strong. So, the topic tonight, which I picked, is Krishna and the social contract. And So first I want to say a few words within a historical and philosophical context about contracts. Interestingly, one of the most one of the oldest contracts we have in history is called the Ten Commandments. In fact, scholars have studied the structure of these Ten Commandments, and it corresponds to the nature of ancient Middle Eastern contracts. And so if you know your Ten Commandments, please tell me what they say. So the first commandment is that I'm the Lord your God that brought you out of Egypt. So in an ancient Middle Eastern contract, the first clause would identify the people participating who are accepting the contract. And then, anyway, so the Ten Commandments are a contract. Krishna in the very ancient Bhagavad Gita says, Jejatha mam prapadyante, as all living beings approach me, tams taiva bhajamiham, I precisely reciprocate with them. And so this notion of reciprocity, this notion of different parties entering into an agreement expressed in Latin by the common phrase quid pro quo. So I will argue here, being naturally argumentative, I will argue here that actually we find this not only in relationships between different people, whether it's God and other souls, or whether it's even in physical nature. For example, Newton's third law of motion is that for every force in the universe, there's an equal and opposite force, which is reciprocity. Galileo, among his other achievements, won't get into Galileo now, but anyway, he was fascinated by pendulums. And a pendulum, of course, is a very good example of reciprocity, because when you pull a pendulum exactly a certain number of degrees to one side, it'll go precisely that number of degrees to the other side. In terms of, actually, Plato talks about this also. Plato talks about political extremes generating their equal opposites. For example, he says that anarchy tends to produce tyranny or democracy, which for Plato weren't that different. And so you find this everywhere. Like I said, Newton's third law of motion. Also, the most prominent, you could say, philosopher of history in the last few centuries was Hegel. Hegel, from Hegel, we derive the notion of a dialectic, that you get a thesis and then you get an antithesis. So that this is, of course, embedded in different philosophies based on Hegel, like Marxism. The idea that if there's a certain historical energy going a certain way, it will produce its opposite energy. And this explains a lot of what's going on, including the capture of Western universities by atheists, and which can be very easily explained in terms of this dialectical historical process, and which is now waning, by the way, for various dialectical reasons. But in any case, returning to the idea of a contract, justice, I mean, the whole principle of justice is based on, in a sense, a type of social contract theory, which means that, let's say society is doing things for you, like providing street lights and a type of civil protection, or even protection from hostile countries. And or so many people actually worked very hard and even gave their lives to invent cures for different diseases. There's a long list of dedicated researchers who actually lost their lives to the various diseases for which they were seeking antidotes or cures. So everywhere you look, we are greatly indebted. And so the very notion of a social contract, so let's just talk directly now about a social contract and then get to Krishna. The earliest, I guess, in the West, the earliest description, explicit description of a social contract, perhaps, is found in Plato's Phaedo, which describes the last day of the life of Socrates before he drank the hemlock and sort of voluntarily committed suicide in obedience to the court of Athens for a false charge against him, that he was corrupting the youth of Athens and sort of denying the gods. So when the Athenian assembly sentenced you to death, you weren't actually supposed to die. It was just a way of saying, get out of town and don't come back. So that's what you're supposed to do. Okay, you're sentenced to death. That means you have no future here in Athens. And in fact, the friends of Socrates, knowing this was the case, arranged for him to escape. This was just normal back then. And to everyone's shock, he refused to escape because he argued that I entered into an implicit social contract with the city of Athens. I've received so many benefits and therefore I have to follow the law of Athens. So whether or not you think, Socrates that was the right thing for him to do, but that's what he did. And so perhaps that's the earliest explicit mention of a contract with a higher power, namely society. So, and then in the modern age, people like John Locke and Rousseau and Hobbes, who was a very strange philosopher, if you know Hobbes. Anyway, so these Western philosophers, they talked about a social contract. And what was interesting about this is implicit in the notion that you enter into a contract with society is that you actually have choices. It's something you do voluntarily. If you, let's say, decide to live on the top of a mountain where there's no one else and grow all your own food and all that, then you can really do what you want. No stop signs, no traffic lights, no taxes, but you live on top of a mountain with no one else. So anyway, there are different theories of, what society is really giving us. Therefore, what do we really owe society? And then ultimately, there's the most important social contract, which is with God. And that's what I was going to talk about today. Because we can't avoid the fact that we are beneficiaries. You are born as a beneficiary. For example, you get a body. And in this case, you sort of won the karma lottery and you got a human body. Or would you rather be a slug? So we have a human body with this intelligence. And in the Sanskrit literature, the Vedic literature, it's always observed that a human body, like other forms, sort of offers us everything. In other words, we can choose to actually spiritually liberate ourselves. We can actually choose eternal life. And that's a whole other topic. How do we know we are eternal? And there are actually very good logical reasons to think that we are eternal. But for now, so the contrast with Krishna, if it turns out to be the case, that actually everything we have is coming from God, including our bodies, our intelligence, the fact that we are capable, if we really choose it, to be rational creatures, choice a lot of people nowadays are not making. But we can actually be rational, we can acquire knowledge, we can ultimately understand ourselves, which is also not a popular topic now. Certainly it's not trending on any of the social media. There's an island in the among the Greek islands called Delphi or Delphi. And there was a temple there, a very famous temple, very famous in the ancient world, a temple to Apollo. And there was a priestess who would be the conduit, the via media between human beings and Apollo. And so people would go there from around the Greco-Roman world, the ancient world, and they would ask questions to Apollo. And of course, through the medium of the priestess, and then the answer would come. So anyway, engraved there on the temple is perhaps the most famous slogan of that temple, which was "Know thyself." know thyself. Because obviously, if we don't really understand who we are, then we don't really understand anything else. Because however we understand the world, however we understand other people, how we understand history, how we understand my own self-interest, uh, it's all based on who we think we are. And so if we get that wrong, everything kind of fails. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives an argument to show us that logically we could not be our physical bodies. We could not be our physical bodies. And so I'll explain what the argument is. First, with a reference to a friend of the Hare Krishna movement, Rene Descartes, who died several hundred years ago before he realized that he was a member of the Hare Krishna movement. Anyway, so Descartes, how should I put it? By the time Descartes was active as a philosopher and scientist and mathematician, one of the great geniuses of the Renaissance, you could actually be philosophical. You didn't just have to repeat church doctrine. There was more room to just think outside the doctrinal box. And so Descartes performed an experiment, a thought experiment, which was very revolutionary in the day, and in a sense changed the whole course of Western philosophy. And he decided that what would happen if I engaged in extreme radical doubt? And of course, that was very revolutionary because there was no doubt about anything. You just had to ask your local priest, or what the Vatican position on that was. And in fact, it was so radical that if you read the introduction to Descartes' Meditations, where he engages in this thought experiment, he goes to great length, basically to save himself from being burned at the stake. He goes to great length to say to the censors, the people that had to approve his book, and those people were the faculty at the Sorbonne, which back then was anything but a secular university. So he goes to great length to explain that, hey, look, we know that we have no reason to doubt anything, because whatever the church tells us, that's obviously the truth. And so it's not for lucky, intelligent people that I'm writing this. It's for those poor fools that don't just accept everything the church says. And therefore, we have to think of clever arguments to save them from their foolish doubting. Anyway, it was prudent for him to say that in his introduction, and he did survive the experience of publishing the book. But anyway, so he engages in this very radical thought experiment where he says, and no one had really ever said that before, at least not in the history of Western philosophy, that what if everything that I think is true, what if I doubt it? So that, for example, I assume there's a real physical world outside my mind, and thereby reject the philosophy of solipsism, which means you do doubt that there's anything outside your mind. I don't suggest you go that way because you may have really serious mental problems. But anyway, he said, what if for example, Descartes said that, what if actually I'm not sitting here in my room in Europe writing this? What if I'm just a brain in the laboratory of an evil genius that's programming me to think that I'm in Europe and that maybe I'm at a writing table and so on? And so he engaged in this radical doubt. Everything I think I know may not be true. Then finally, he concluded that there's one thing which I cannot doubt. It's actually impossible to doubt, and that is that I'm thinking about this. And so he came up with this famous cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. And so therefore he had a foundation of certainty. Because if you doubt yourself, the very fact you're doubting it proves that you exist. So then he starts to build back the whole edifice of pious 17th century knowledge about the soul and God and everything. So, so Krishna gives a similar argument in the Bhagavad Gita. it's, it's different argument, but there are definitely connections. And so the argument that Krishna gives in the Gita is found in chapter 2 at the beginning of his teaching, where he says in Sanskrit, Dehi no asmin jatha dehe komarang jovanam jara tatha dehantara praptir dhiras tatra namoyati, which means that just as in this body, because now we are all inhabiting bodies. So just as in this body, Dehi nosmin jata dehi, we experience childhood, jovanam, youth, and jara, from which we get the English word geriatrics and all that stuff. So, and jara means old age. So then Krishna says, similarly, tata dehantra prapti, we receive another body. So what's the argument here? Where's the argument? The argument is that if we take Descartes seriously, which I think we should, and the thing that we know more than we know anything else, or the one thing we know with absolute certainty is that we exist, because you couldn't think about it unless you first existed. So if we exist, then our child body is very significantly different from our adolescent body. It's not that your child body just stretched into your adolescent body. That's not what happened. That's kind of a cartoon theory of it. Actually, our child body transformed. I mean, just like, for example, one just a little interesting aside here is that around 2,500 years ago, the Indo-Aryan world, both in India and also in Europe, they became fascinated with the idea that, oh my God, everything's always changing, everything's in flux in this world. And so in India, this was most famously expressed by a gentleman named Buddha. And that was kind of the essence of what he was saying, is that everything's changing, nothing is fixed. And then the same idea popped up in Europe, people like Heraclitus, who famously said, you cannot step into the same river twice, because the second time you step into it, it's different, because some of the water emptied out to wherever the river ends its journey, and new waters come in. So just as you cannot step into the same river twice, you cannot breathe it twice in the same body. Because every time you breathe out, something that was inside you is now outside you, and something that was outside is now inside. Plus, if you study microbiology, which is kind of like, it's almost hallucinogenic when you really get into what's going on inside your body, they're like absurdly, impossibly sophisticated processes going on in your body. And so at every moment it's changing. And then, every so many years, your body doesn't even look the way it used to until you get to be older like me. And then it's kind of like a horror show and you look at pictures of yourself. You just want to say to people, no pictures, please. So, so actually our body is changing at every moment, and yet we are continuously the same person. You may have changed your mind. For example, my mother, I had a great mother. She kept my old college essays. She was proud of them. When I went back and read them, it's like, I was horrified. I thought, I will pay anyone not to read these. Because I was in Berkeley during the middle of the revolution, participated in all that. And I can't imagine a more presumptuous, stupidly proud person than I was. And so even though that's true, but it was still me. I mean, my views, my mind has changed in many ways, but I'm the same person. Even when I think back to my childhood, growing up in LA, West LA, honk if you like West LA. Anyway, so still, it was me. And if you do a little linguistic anthropology, in other words, we can often find an index into the mind by just seeing how people commonly speak. When they're not editing themselves, they're not really thinking about it, they just speak. Like, for example, yeah, I was born in Los Angeles. I grew up there. So it's me. I grew up in LA, but if you saw a picture of me, you wouldn't recognize me. So, and I might not recognize you if I saw you when you were 3 years old. So the body's completely different. It's a different body. It's actually a different body, but it's still you. So therefore, it's just not an option that we are the body. You know, I hope this doesn't seriously disappoint anyone. But, you know, the upside of not being your body is you don't die. I mean, that's the good part of it. The bad part is all of your vanity is absurd. But the good part of it is that you don't die. So, so let's just go with this. Let's say we are eternal beings. We are somehow took a wrong turn somewhere and we're inside a material body, subject to karma. And yet, where did the world come from? It's like, let's say, for example, you're walking in a park and in a picnic area, someone placed a big basket with a bunch of food that you like. And you say, well, I don't see any owner of this basket. And then you say, if anyone owns this basket, I will give you like 3 seconds to show up. Nobody? Okay, it's mine. I mean, there's something wrong with that picture. So in the same way, we're born into this world, and how much time and energy have we really devoted to figure out who it belongs to? Or do we just assume, well, nobody's claiming it? It's interesting because the idea that our bodies just, let's say our bodies evolved, but the idea is that they evolved without any intelligence behind it, with the advance of microbiology, with the advance of genetics, is becoming more and more idiotic, stupid. Because if you actually study what we now know about how the body works, it is absurdly sophisticated. The body is far, far, far more sophisticated than your computer. And so if you think the best explanation of computers is that rain fell, seismic shaking, lightning strikes, and then just computers appeared. So if you think that is logical, then go with your physicalist theory that no one made the body. But if we have little common sense, I mean, it's really mind-boggling when you learn about what's going. It's like basically, it's sort of like the DNA RNA. It's like a fully computerized Amazon fulfillment warehouse. And actually, it turns out that the way our bodies evolve or grow is not by physical changes, but actually by coded information. So the DNA actually carries code, like computer code. And so anyway, enough said. So let's go with the logical, probable idea that there's some intelligence behind all this. Then how do we respond to it? Nowadays, everyone talks about rights, isn't it? Everyone has their rights. But there's a logical entailment, which means that if we have rights, there's something else that has to be true logically. And that is that we have duties. Let's say, for example, you have a right to live securely within your home without anyone breaking into your house or in any way acting aggressively against you or your house. If you have that right, which is in the Constitution, I'm sorry, the Bill of Rights, if you have that right, then that means the rest of us have a duty to respect the sanctity of your home. If people have the positive right means you have a right to some positive outcome, like, which I believe in. For example, the right to, which makes me not a perfect conservative, the right to quality medical care, the right to a quality education. So if that's the case, then all kinds of doctors and nurses have a duty to treat you. So you can't have a right without a duty. It's impossible. If you have rights, other people have duties. If they have rights, you have duties. So it's interesting that in our fantastically narcissistic society nowadays, that everyone talks about rights but not duties. That's one interesting point. Nor do people notice that the idea of equality, let's say we're equal. I mean, we're not physically equal. Look at just competitive sports. I mean, since when is everyone athletically equal? If that were true, no one would ever win and no one would ever lose. We're not intellectually equal. We're not artistically equal. We don't have equal emotional intelligence. Some people have great powers of empathy, and other people seem to really run a big deficit in that category. So if we're not physically equal, we're not mentally equal, we're not intellectually equal, where's the equality? I mean, can we locate it? Where do you locate the equality? That's something that does not trouble modern people because thinking kind of went out with Charleston or something. It's just, it's just not something people do nowadays, serious thinking. But there was one serious thinker, despite all his flaws, Thomas Jefferson, who, in writing, he and his friends wrote the Declaration of Independence. They were keenly aware of what David Hume said, the philosopher, the great skeptic, mostly the first half of the 18th century, Scottish troublemaker. But anyway, not that all Scots are troublemakers, but he was. But one of the things he said, which is a very powerful truth, is that the way he put it in his language, you cannot derive an ought from an is. In other words, let's say, for example, that it is a fact that you're much stronger than another person. It is a fact that you have the power of life and death over this person. Therefore, you should not exercise that power in a way which significantly harms that person. So the is just stating the material facts, like you're this and he or she is that and so on. But if you say, therefore, we ought to do this, or we ought not to do that, it doesn't logically derive. Let's say, for example, someone shoots another person, an innocent person, and let's say all the forensic experts come in, and so we now know virtually every relevant fact about this crime. And then you say, well, therefore, this person should pay for their crime. But why? Because if the only true facts are empirical, then you cannot allege a metaphysical fact, namely that there are objective principles, right and wrong, and when people objectively do wrong things, there are consequences. If you believe that, I mean, I believe that, if you believe that, then you believe in metaphysical facts. If there are objective metaphysical facts, it means that we don't simply live in a physical universe. We live in a bi-dimensional universe where there are physical facts, but there are also metaphysical facts. And how could there be metaphysical facts? Well, there has to be a source of metaphysical facts. And for thousands of years in Western philosophy, people thought it was a no-brainer that if there are metaphysical facts, there's some kind of God. So if you look around, I mean, just look at your own body, the fact that your body's changing, and in one very significant sense, you are not. If you consider the fact that all of us were not complete sociopaths, I'm definitely not a complete sociopath, but I don't think I'm even a slight. So anyway, so anyone who's not just a hardened, heartless sociopath believes in metaphysical facts, like some things are really right and wrong. So if there are objective some things are really beautiful, that's also metaphysical. Ironically, another thing that's metaphysical is yesterday. I don't mean the song by Paul McCartney, but you cannot empirically prove yesterday, because any evidence you offer is today. You can show a bunch of timestamp things, but that's not serious. It's not a serious argument. Another thing that you cannot physically prove, because it's a metaphysical fact, is that when you're sleeping and dreaming and then wake up, the world you experience awake is somehow ontologically more real than the world of your dreams. Now, how are you going to prove that? Your dream is not available for empirical study. And yet we assume it's true. Everyone assumes it's true. Another thing, which is a metaphysical fact that can never be empirically proved, is that there is a real world outside of your mind. Because you can't empirically prove it. That would be circular reasoning. That would be a ridiculous example of circular reasoning, which means that you use the conclusion to prove itself. Anyway, no, that's stuff. So we live in a metaphysical universe. If you're not a hardened sociopath and you actually believe certain things are right and wrong, if you believe that yesterday really existed, if you believe certain things are really beautiful, if you think it's wrong to murder innocent people, if you believe any of those things are really true, then you live in a bidimensional universe. And how could that be the case? And so again, for thousands of years, people thought, well, there must be some kind of God who is somehow the foundation and the verification and the explanation of the fact that, in fact, the most important things in our world are metaphysical, like love, justice, equality, all of them completely metaphysical, none of them empirically demonstrable. So therefore, if there's a God, and if all these things are true, then what's the deal? You know, the 10 Commandment is one contract. You know, is there a better deal out there? Or what other deals are there? God, I'm starting to sound like the president. Anyway, sorry. This is not the right time to keep repeating the word deal. It's not the right time in history. Anyway, so Jefferson, who was aware of Hume, said that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we're created equal, not evolved equal, created equal, and we have certain rights which come from a creator. So the Declaration of Independence derives metaphysical facts from a metaphysical fact, namely the existence of a creator. Therefore, it's philosophically coherent, unlike the completely incoherent views that some people hold nowadays, especially in universities. So, what is the contract, the social contract with Krishna? If it's true that we owe our existence, including our consciousness, our moral intuitions, our happiness, our ability to elevate ourselves to exalted spiritual states, if we owe all this to someone, then rather than just being born with rights, which we are also, but we are especially born with duties and obligations. And that's, I think, the biggest difference between the pre-industrial world, the classical world, both East and West, and the modern world. What really struck them, these people who had a lot of wisdom, what really struck them about our life is that we have so many duties. We owe so much for all the gifts we received. Whereas in the modern world, we kind of take that for granted and like, yeah, of course I do. You know, those are human rights and I'm human. And I don't owe them to anybody. And it's really about everyone else's, what are you going to do for me? And, you know, I have my rights. And there's very little serious thinking going on about what our, you could say, cosmic duties are. And that's what Krishna taught. Do we have that verse? Oh, okay. So before you ask for a refund, I'll actually translate these verses. So the first one is, Karma brahmodbhavam vidhi brahmaksharam samudbhavam tasmat sarvagatam brahma nityam yagye pratishtha. So what that means is that karma, the word karma comes from the Sanskrit root kar, from which we get words in English like create, increase, and so on. And so karma in the most basic sense just means action. And then it comes to mean a cosmic system of action and reaction. But here it's being used in its most fundamental sense, just action. And especially in this context, it actually means sort of proper action, like doing your duty. And so karma, Brahma Udbhavam. Udbhavam means it arises from Brahma, which means eternal knowledge. In this case, eternal knowledge. So there's eternal knowledge in Sanskrit called the Veda, which just means knowledge. And so karma brahma vidi know. The verb Sanskrit verb vid means to know. That's where we get English words like wit and vision and video. Those all come from the Sanskrit root vid, which means to know. So here's the second person singular imperative. I'm sure you're very anxious to know, which means know that karma, in other words, knowing what to do. Like, for example, now we have medicine is very much advanced. Whenever I get nostalgic about going back to Jane Austen's world, what I do sometimes, I just think that, well, what about the dentistry back then? And it cures me of that nostalgia. So, so when people do their duty, when people do the right thing, the ability to do the right thing, to help humanity, to help other creatures, to help yourself, that knowledge comes from eternal wisdom, these books called the Veda. And so then Krishna says, Brahmaksharam Samudbhavam, and this perfect knowledge comes from the indestructible reality of God. It comes from omniscience, because whatever knowledge we have in any field, it's just a little slice of omniscience. And that's what this is saying here. Brahmaksharam Samudbhavam. Samudbhavam means it arises from. Tasmat, therefore, Sarvagatam Brahma, the all-pervading absolute, Nityam, always, Yajne, in sacrifice, Pratishtati, is situated. Pratishtati, yeah. So in my book, Guide to the Bhagavad Gita, okay, I will now do an infomercial. I'm just kidding, I won't. So in the Bhagavad Gita, which I translated, actually a complete guide to it, I explain all these things. Yajna, sacrifice, is what makes the world go round. We'll see it in the next verse. If you put the next verse up. What?
Sanskrit.
Oh, yeah, just the Sanskrit for 16. I mean, not the Devanagari. Yeah. So avam. Avam Sanskrit means thus. In other words, based on what the previous verse said, there's a conclusion to be drawn here. And so therefore, this verse starts with avam, thus. Pravartitam chakram. I'll translate this very literally because it's usually translated somewhat non-literally, but the literal translation, I think, is a blockbuster. So avam pravartitam chakra. A chakra, as you may know, literally means a circle or a wheel or something like that. That's what it literally means. That's a chakra. And so avam pravartitam chakram, a chakra, a cycle, has been made to turn. You may recognize Vartitam from the second Yoga Sutra, the definition of yoga, which is Chitta Vritti Nirodha. That's the second, anyway, second Yoga Sutra. But Vritti there also means turning. So here, Pravartitam. So a wheel, a cycle has been made to turn. And Nanu Vartiyatiha Jaha. And in this world, a person that does not keep it turning. I mean, I would love to go into all the technical details of the grammar, but I think not right now, because it's really fascinating. I mean, the Sanskrit here is just brilliant and fascinating. So, well, I'll just say what the words mean. So it means one who does not keep the cycle turning. And so what is that cycle? The cycle is, as I explained in the previous verse, that you are given information in these eternal literatures about how you as a human being should act responsibly, beneficially for yourself and society. And if you do that, you will reap many rewards because you've done your duty. And if you do your duty, the universe rewards you. Then if you don't, you're punished. That's called karma. So, but the cycle is that our duty involves giving and then receiving. Nowadays, the kind of like people prefer just to receive and then receive again. But actually, we give and we receive. That's the cycle. Reciprocity in a relationship. you have to give. If you want to be loved in a relationship, you have to give love. Anyone here know that old 60s song, Since I Fell for You by Lenny Welch? No. Anyway, I won't get sentimental on it. But the first word is a big hit back then. So it begins when you just give love and never get love, you'd better let love depart. And so a good relationship means you're giving love, but you're receiving love. If you're just giving and not receiving, you'll never be happy. The same thing when you go to the supermarket, you take some groceries and then you pay for them. So whether it's relationships, whether it's commerce, anywhere you look, and that's the balance. That's Newton's every force an equal and opposite force. That's a pendulum. It's only in the center the pendulum comes to rest. So when you live a life of reciprocity, you'll be happy and satisfied. You know, what do they say? No rest for the wicked. So if we're basically stealing everything, our bodies, you know, the body has a price tag. We think everything's a freebie. The planet, our own body, the rivers, everything is just like, you know, the seductive thing about the, frankly, rather ridiculous idea that no one gave us these things is that you get to just be a lifelong shoplifter. You get to take everything and never give back. So if you do give back, then that's the cycle. And so Krishna says, if you don't keep that cycle turning, if you take and don't give back, then something happens. He says, Agayur. Ayur, you know Ayurveda, some of you heard of that. Ayur literally in Sanskrit means duration of life. So Ayurveda, Veda knowledge means knowledge of how to keep your life going. So Aghaya, your life, the whole duration of life is Aga, an offense against nature, against God. Indriya Ramo, because the person lived only to gratify their own senses. And Krishna says Mogam. Mogam means uselessly, futilely. That a person, Partha Sajiv, that person lives, Sajivati means that person lives in vain. So this is the social contract with God. It's, you know, for example, let's say parents are very rich and they give money to their child and the child just squanders it, wastes this. If you don't believe this happens, just you have to watch more Hallmark movies. Anyway, just kidding. So anyway, that's what a life is. For example, if one has the great fortune of having good parents, I had that great fortune, and there has to be reciprocation. There has to be reciprocation. If you go to a store to buy food, if you do anything, in a relationship, in a friendship, in a romantic relationship, the secret is very simple: reciprocity. Don't take more than you give. It's that simple. And if you're with someone who chronically takes more than they give, you have a problem. It's not healthy. So just as reciprocity is necessary everywhere, also in our relationship with God. And that's why the idea of an eternal hell is so like wickedly absurd, because the punishment monstrously doesn't fit the crime. Also, there's no good reason. I mean, I challenge anyone to come up with a good reason why God would only give you one lifetime to kind of, you know, figure it out. I mean, why not? What's he got to lose, or she or they? You know, what does God have to lose if you get some more chances? It's like some kind of, I don't know, demonic parent that like, okay, kid, I'll give you one chance and one chance to get this right. You didn't get it right. All right, I'm chopping your hands off and throwing you into the, you know, into the furnace. I mean, it's absurd. So you'll get as many chances as you need. I mean, you can stay here as long as you want in this kind of kooky material world. But ultimately, if we get it right, if we just reciprocate. I know myself, probably you too, when I was a little kid growing up in LA, on my mother's birthday, my father would take me to a store to buy a present for my mother. And then my father's birthday, my mother would take me. So it was their money. But they were teaching me, like good parents, they were teaching me to reciprocate. They were teaching me to offer love to the source from which I'd received so much love. And so this is true everywhere, and it's true in our relationship with God. And so that's all it is. That's bhakti yoga. That's a sane life. That's what it really means to be religious, this or that religion. It just means don't take more than you give. And cultivate gratitude. So that's, I'll stop there for now, leave time for agreement and praise. I'm just kidding. That was a joke. That was a joke. So, any questions? Yes, please. Yes. Sure. Yes, that's an excellent question. Don't ever do that again. So as far as that is called in Western philosophy, theodicy, from the words theos, God, Greek words theos, God, and dike, justice. In other words, is there justice in God? And atheists have long thought this is a slam dunk. There can't be a just God because good people suffer and a lot of really bad people get away with it. And this is based, and so the formal argument is that if there's what the philosophers sometimes call a triple O God, like a triple threat in football or something. So a triple O God means omniscient, he knows everything, omnipotent, all powerful, and omnibenevolent, or all good. So if God knows everything, he knows there's injustice. If God is all merciful, he wants to stop the injustice. If God is all powerful, he can stop the justice, but he doesn't. Hence, slam dunk, there's no triple O God. Now, but there are problems with this argument. It's one of those things, if you watch the NBA where they go up for a slam dunk and they unfortunately bounce it off the, off the rim. You know, it's a slam dunk. That happens actually. Even people are getting millions of dollars to do that. So here are the problems with that argument. Well, it's a good argument if you buy into the, frankly, I think, absurd assumption that you only get one life. I think that's absurd. If God is really eternal and souls are eternal, then why smash it down into one life? So, karma. Well, first, a general principle of moral philosophy. If someone consciously causes or allows a certain harm to another person for a higher good, then that allowance or either causing or allowing some harm is justified. For example, when I was a kid, my parents took me to the dentist. Do children want to go to the dentist? No. Or I had to get shots. I remember I was like about in LA, I must have been like 5 years old. And my older brother and my father took us down to some clinic. We had to get some shot or something. Don't tell the Secretary of Health. But anyway, I had to get a shot. And so my brother went first. He was like 6.5. And so they took him into a room, left the door open, and I saw him, he had to pull down his little pants, and they took out a needle, and I thought, I am so out of here. So I literally I ran for it. I ran out of the clinic and I ran down the street. My father, he very easily caught up with me, put me on his shoulder and brought me back, and I had to get my shot. So was my father evil? No, he was a wonderful, loving father. But the point is, the harm, you could say like pain, if you want to call pain a harm. It's not a permanent harm in this case, but it was for a greater good. It was for a greater good. So if a certain harm is necessary for a greater good, then is it really an evil act? So you could say, well, now I always get this. It's like, well, what about a little child? Let's say a child that's killed, which is, of course, horrible. It's a horrible tragedy. How could that child possibly be responsible? But if we have many lives, because God is not crazy and doesn't just give us one life, if we have many lives, and in our past life we did some really bad things, and we're being punished for it in this life, then is that exactly where's the injustice? One further point, actually, a loving parent may punish the child, but never actually harm the child. And so we are eternal souls, and the body we have is actually a virtual reality machine. We are not the body, it's a virtual reality machine. And so, of course, we feel the pain, but we also feel the pain to the extent that we are trying to exploit the body. So if someone is stoic and just not at all attached to the body, yeah, they might feel some pain. But as we know, pain has an objective and a subjective side. I can give one example at my own expense, just to show you, anyway. When I was 29 years old and a member of a spiritual institution, ISKCON, I suddenly found myself, without ever wanting it, thrust into the position of being a big guru, because my guru, Prabhupada, left this world, and he named a small number of people to take over that responsibility of being gurus. And so I was 29 years old and just sort of barely had achieved, if in fact I had achieved it, a functional prefrontal cortex. In other words, young men, I mean, it's hard to exaggerate how clueless young men can be, having been one myself. So anyway, I was thrust into this position. I didn't volunteer. I didn't really want. I tried to get out of it, but I couldn't, because everyone in the institution was saying, no, you got to do it. So there I was, a big guru, and everyone, Oriental extravagance. I was being honored and so on. And so how could it not go to your head a little bit when you're 29 years old and you've been practicing spiritual life for 8 years? And so, I mean, I didn't do anything really bad, and I was more sane than insane, and didn't really knowingly cause harm to anyone. But still, I kind of began to believe that, yeah, actually people owe me this honor. So then at one point I had to go to the hospital. I had a medical emergency. About how many years later would that have been? That was 10 years later or something. I was in Gainesville, Florida. And so people with me called an ambulance. I went to the hospital, and fortunately, I, was able to fix it. But when I first got to the hospital, there was this nurse, actually this very pretty redhead South African nurse, who was assigned to me. And so she had to check to make sure there was nothing life-threatening. And at that point, I felt I really had to use, to go number one. And because of all the stress and trauma and everything, and it was like becoming like excruciating. And so I told her I have to go do that. And she said to me, no, first I have to check all the, she had to go through her checklist of things, make sure there's nothing life-threatening. And I wasn't used to people telling me, you can't do this. It's really absurd. Anyway, so then a minute later, I said to her, I really have to do that. So I remember she stopped. She put her hands on her hips and looked at me and said, will you stop being such a baby? And here I was, the great guru. And actually, she shocked me out of the pain. I didn't feel anything after that. So I'm just giving older and wiser now. So anyway, I never forgot that. It was so shocking and so educational. But the reason I brought up that example is because there's a subjective side to pain. I really thought that I can't bear this pain. And then when she told me that, I didn't have any pain anymore. I don't mean to say all pain is like that. I don't mean to say we shouldn't have compassion that are in pain. It's just that the more you really understand I'm not this body. And the reason we think we are the body is because it's the instrument for exploiting the universe. Because we exploit the universe through our body, through our senses. That's basically what we do with it. And so the more we want to exploit the universe, and therefore the more we're attached to and identify with the body, the more the vicissitudes, the problems of the body really knock us for a loop. But if you're, say, yogi, bhakti yogi, that's our brand. If you're a bhakti yogi and you are cultivating the understanding that no, I'm not the body, which is an instrument for exploiting the world. I'm actually an eternal soul, and I'm an eternal loving servant of God, of Krishna. Then you have very different experiences. So if it's the case, because in philosophy, if you show that if something is the case, then something else logically follows, then it's an argument if there's some reasonable possibility that it is the case. Like a little philosophy. So anyway, so if it's the case that whatever suffering we experience, whatever injustice, first of all, is a result of our previous activities, karma, and ultimately is meant to heal us, to cure us of that inappropriate tendency, and that there was no lesser way to actually dig it out. It's like sometimes God has to do invasive surgery on your heart. In the yoga world, they call it sanskaras, these very deep-rooted impressions from past lives. It's very deep-rooted. And so if that's the case, then the problem of evil collapses because there is a rational explanation. You may say, well, I just can't believe. Well, but then it's not about some logical problem. It's about your beliefs. So if one is attacking an argument by saying, there cannot be a God if there's so much injustice in the world, then in order to prove that, you can't simply tell us what your hunches are. You actually have to show there's a logical problem with it. Like if I say, John is a very happy married bachelor. There's a logical problem there because you can't be a married bachelor. So there's no logical problem in saying that God created the world despite all the problems with the world. So anything else? Yes.
Your conclusion was that, we have duties to God, and specifically that we need to not take more than we give. And I was thinking that God gives us so much, like the sun, the air, the planet, our bodies, and He gives us so much. How can we possibly not take more than we give? Like, how can we give in a way that matches what He's given us?
Well, it's like a child. I mean, how can a little child, reciprocate with the parents who are, paying the mortgage, shopping? I mean, I think of how hard my parents worked for me. I always feel like a little guilty because I was I wouldn't say I was a brat. I was somewhere between a brat and a really, great kid. I mean, I was pretty great until I hit my teen years, and then I just definitely. So, but if you if you have a child and you see your child is sincerely expressing love for you, that's all you want. I mean, what else do you want? You don't say to a 5-year-old child, well, if you really love me, go out and get a job, and help to pay the mortgage. So if we as souls are doing our best, that's perfect. Then that's Bhakti Yoga. Anything else? Go ahead. Well, not you. Samsara literally means sort of like going around, cycles of birth, death, and so on. Krishna, there's this great verse. It's like a get out of jail card in the Bhagavad Gita, where Krishna says, Nehabi kramanashosti pratyavayo navidyate swalpam api asya dharmasya trayate mahato vayat, which means nehabi kramanashosti, that this endeavor, and it's interesting, abhikrama, which is translated endeavor, literally means stepping forward. That's literally what it means. So if you really step forward into your spiritual life, in this life, nehabi, then whatever you do is never lost. It's just like, for example, when I dropped out of school, I was in Berkeley, and then I joined a dangerous cult. Just kidding. I joined the Hare Krishna movement, and then and I dropped out of school because it was like I couldn't handle those two things. I was just 20 years old, and it was just a little too much for me. So and actually my guru, Prabhupada, he really wanted me to finish school. He wanted me to be educated so I could make sense to educated people. And so it always haunted me that I hadn't really followed the instruction of the guru. But I just knew it wasn't the time. So finally, Krishna let me go back to school and finish everything up. And so what was the point that I was going to make? So yeah, right. It wasn't lost. Thank you. At least someone is thinking around here. So yeah, so there was no loss, and because I was worried about that, so I went back and I spoke to counselor, the arts and sciences at UCLA, because I went back to UCLA because I was living in LA then, actually it's about a couple of miles from UCLA, and they happily let me back in. They were glad to have me back. So I mean, if the University of California is going to do that, why not God? So whatever you achieve in your spiritual path is yours to keep eternally. It's your eternal asset, and it's in your spiritual bank account. So nehabi kramanashosti pratyavayo, and it'll never be destroyed. Navidyate, it's never destroyed. And sualpam in Sanskrit means very little. Sualpam api, even very little, asya dharmasya, of this dharma, even very little of this dharma, trayate, will save you, mahato bhayat, from the great danger, which is precisely falling down from the human platform into a lower form where you just, can't really do philosophy or yoga or anything else. You can bark and all that, but you can't practice spiritual life. So that, in a sense, that danger that you brought up, Krishna says, even if you do very little of this Krishna consciousness, you will not fall into that. So it's a great deal. Oh God, I can't use that word anymore. Not in the present political climate. I don't want to use that word. Yeah. So yes, please.
Help someone mature from transactionalism to reciprocity.
Right.
How would you guide them?
Well said.
Curious.
That was really, really well stated. It's like, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. George Harrison, there's a great song by George Harrison, who was Hare Krishna. You can lead a horse to water, you can't make him drink. And one of the lines in that song is just, a little bit ungrammatical, but it's colloquial. You can have it all laid out in front of you, but it don't make you think. And so people, like the people around you or people you meet, they're on different levels. I mean, they all appear to, be Homo sapiens or whatever, but some of them have a spiritual background, either in this life or a past life. Some of them are just, it's just not there yet. And so it would be nice if there was some great way we could just persuade everyone to do the right thing. But so in that sense, yeah, if someone is just even interested in talking to you about it, that's a good sign that this person, could really be your friend. So, but there are a lot of people out there who are interested. So that's the good news. That answer your question?
Getting there. I think for me,
Well, pursue your point.
I feel like I can tell when I'm in reciprocity,
Right.
and I don't always notice when I'm in transactionalism. Because that's so normal.
Give an example of something which in retrospect you stamped transactional.
Like, I've been trying to get pregnant for 8 years, and I'm like, but I'm eating the right foods, and I'm doing the things, and where's my baby? I'm being good, give me the baby. So it's like, oh, that's transaction, like, I'm trying to earn my way into a reward.
Right.
And I feel like that's very Abrahamic in its way of going about, you know, going from A to Z, salvation, there we go. But reciprocity, it's like, we're in the same room, but it's it's such a big, massive difference in how you feel.
Right.
But it's a very subtle difference, like, in the concept of it.
Yeah, I get the point. It's a very good point. That's where the kind of the surrender comes in. Because, like, for example, in my own life, I'll give an example from my life as you did, but I of course, there are things we want to do, even things I say, like, want to do this for God. So even if you say, well, I want a child, but I'm going to raise my child in the right way. I'm going to, do everything in my power to make this child a gift to the world. And so we can have those good intentions, but my conviction, which is sort of the result of both, I mean, not just philosophy, but also life experience, is that if I really depend on Krishna, on God, then whatever happens ultimately was for the best. I mean, there were things in my life which at the time, literally, I was so angry, I was just like throwing things against the wall, guys go a little crazy. So I mean, like, really, and then in retrospect, I think, oh, thank God, that would have been the worst possible thing for me. That would have ruined my life had that happened. I'm not saying having a child will ruin your life. I'm just saying in my own case. And so as I've lived my life and wanted so many things, either selfishly or even wanted them to serve God, and then, the long list of things that were not given to me. And I would say practically in every case, whether it's relationships or positions or facilities, anything, in every case, I've come to see that I'm much, much better off. In fact, in many cases, that would have ruined me, or that would have been a disaster. And so, therefore, if it's like really fixing the goal, we have like little sub goals, like I want a child, or I want this, or I want that. But the overriding goal, the central goal, has to be that I'm an eternal soul and I've got to get back to my eternal life and not just play games in this wacky world down here, where no matter what I do, it all ends, game over. And then what? And so that, if you really have that supreme goal, and that's the real purpose of your life, the real telos, that's the real purpose, then whatever happens, we just realize, well, somehow, in a way that I can understand now, maybe I can't understand now, but the day will come when I will see this was a powerful push toward my real goal, what's really going to make me happy forever. And so I think if we have that conviction, then, we slip into transactions. It's funny, the word used in Sanskrit for that is, karma just can mean action, karma phala. The phala means fruit. So it means action which aims at a fruit or a benefit. The word phala, fruit, is often used as to mean a benefit, a payoff. And so Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I think it's chapter 2, text 47, karma nyeva adhikaraste. You have a right, adhikara, only to the action itself. You have a right to do your duty. So let's say if you felt it was your duty to, or what you wanted to be, get a child, you have a right to do that. You had a right to try to have a child. But Krishna says only to the duty itself. Karmanyeva adhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana, and we never have a right to the fruit of the work. So for example, let's say I go somewhere in which I want to teach about Krishna, and so I invite the public and no one shows up. Well, but I did my best. So in a sense, Krishna says, you've acted perfectly because you did your duty sincerely. And whether, 1,000 people come or no one comes. So he says, karma nyeva dikaraste ma phaleshu kadachan. I never have a right to the fruits. So we get angry because we think, well, I had a right to that. I not only wanted it, I had a right to it. And that's what kind of aggravates us. And then Krishna says, ma karma phala hitur bhur. Don't ever be motivated to get the fruit of work. So let's say, for example, I'm devoted to Krishna. And, well, let's say a person, because I am not really in the child producing age. So
You
let's,
can make about money.
okay, money. Okay, let's use money. It's funny, the same Beatles song saying, money can't buy me love and give me money. So I guess kind of hadn't quite, they're a little ambivalent on that one. So let's say I want money. And I say, well, Krishna, if you give me a lot of money, like I would, for example, would be delighted to get maybe a few $billion. Not greedy. Because if I had that, I would just use it to create beautiful centers and farms and libraries, just to help people become God conscious. So I can desire that, but as a service to God. So let's say, so far, I don't want to reveal confidential information about my finances, but I didn't get the billions of dollars yet. So if you're just being nice to me, because anyway, so let's say I want a few $billion to create these fantastic projects to spiritualize the world, but it doesn't come. So if my real motive was to please God, then, well, it's like maybe I, baked, I don't know, bean soup for him, but it turns out he doesn't want bean soup. So if I really just want to please him and not show off how great I am at cooking bean soup, then if I really want Krishna's pleasure, then that's fine, because that was the only reason I was cooking anyway, to please him. So if I wanted the money just to please Krishna and to help people, and then it turns out that, well, Krishna is going to do it another way. That Krishna does care about the world, but he's just going to do it a different way. Then if my desire was to please Krishna, and Krishna was pleased by my desire, pleased by my sincerity, then, as they say in Sanskrit, krita kritya, my duty's done. My goal was to please Krishna. I did please Krishna. And if he wants to do things another way, that's his right. So ma karma phala hetu. Don't be motivated by the fruit of work. Because if I get a lot of money and build all these things, the world will really be impressed with me, and I can really show off what a great servant of God I am, et cetera, et cetera. And the last part of this verse is mate sangos to karmani, which means don't be attached to inaction. Because like the sour grapes, in other words, let's say I'm trying to do something for Krishna and it's going to be hard, and it may not work out. So, well, if I'm not going to get a lot of credit, if I'm not going to become famous and everyone's going to love me because I did this great thing, quote unquote, for charity or for the world, then why bother? Why bother trying? Because Krishna may not give me what I want. I may not be glorified. So why bother? So don't have that mentality. Why bother if it may not work out? Because it's the actual endeavor that pleases Krishna. It's your sincerity. And if your real goal is to please God, and he is pleased by your sincerity, then everything's perfect. Hope that made sense. Yeah, I appreciated your question. So, anything else? If not, the bad news is now you're gonna have to eat something. Just kidding. So thank you all very much. Merry Christmas.